So this past week, I went on a bike packing overnighter to test out this guy. This is the DX35 by Rekkiworks. This is a pre-production model, so some things may change from the final version. And they launched their Kickstarter campaign yesterday, but I'm going to tell you what I think about it, what I liked, what I disliked, what I thought was super novel, and hopefully that will help you decide whether or not you want to get one for your very own on their Kickstarter campaign. So if you're not familiar with Rekkiworks, you might be familiar with the Jack the Bike Rack. That was the project that Luke and a partner launched very successfully a couple years ago. And this is kind of his solo project to create the ultimate bike packing bag. One thing right away that you can probably tell is that it's fairly large. This is a bag, for actually more accurately, a bag system that's designed for, let's say, not the ultra minimalist bike packers, which I completely fall in. And I like to carry my hobbies with me, whether that's birding or some art supplies or a ping pong paddle. If you're the type of cyclist that kind of scoffs at the idea of cutting your toothbrush in half, then you might be interested in this bag. The best way I would describe this is that it feels like it's inspired by kind of those frameless backpacking bags that tend to be ultra light, and it relies on what you stuff in it to give it its structure. To attach it to your bike, you actually use these very simple elastic bungee and toggles, wrap it around the handlebars, and weave it through the MOLLE strap on the back. There's a couple different settings here depending on your handlebar height and width. One thing to know about this bag is it definitely needs a rack to support it from the bottom. And I would go a step further and say that depending on what you have in here, you definitely need something with a platform. So a basket or a demi-porteur rack would be probably the best fit. The big headline feature that sets this bag apart is this kind of removable brain that attaches with 4 clips here. This lets you quickly access things while you're riding. You can have these zippers face you and you can quickly access them. Let's say your phone or snacks are here, or you can stuff things under the bungee. The brain comes in 2 versions. This one's a pretty interesting one because you can unzip this front pocket and you've got like backpack straps. So I think this is actually pretty cool. The whole thing turns into like a little mini day bag. So if you're the type of bike traveler that, let's say, likes to go on a hike, or you plan to walk around the town after you get to your destination, the bag itself becomes your backpack. And this is a feature that I really dig. Another thing that's really interesting is the like webbing strap systems that it uses, so it can be compatible with many things. Like I mentioned, to attach it to your handlebar, you've got these elastic toggles, very easy to move it up and down. These MOLLE straps. Likewise, these yellow straps here are very easy to remove. They just kind of loop into themselves. And you can adjust it for the perfect fit by looping it back through here. But I think by doing this, it makes it really easy to repair, to replace parts as they break on an extended tour. Another interesting thing are like the side pockets. These things are like gargantuan. They do have a drawstring over here, so you can kind of cinch it up, but more than enough room to put a water bottle. In fact, I think you can probably stuff 2 water bottles in here. So it's got 2 of these, one on each side. And then the front is more elastic cordage, so you can put more layers or whatever you need in here. On the bottom, to attach it to the rack, again, there's 2 rows of MOLLE webbing everywhere, so you can make it pretty secure. As you can see, this thing has massive capacity, lots of places to put things externally for quick access. Again, this cool removable brain that can turn into a backpack. Did I mention they also have a shoulder strap, so you can connect it to this bag and carry the whole thing into your hotel room or around town. Okay, so those are some of the like headline features for me. Clearly, if you need or want the space, then this bag can give it to you in spades. I found that I could probably put my entire load that I needed for an overnighter just in this one bag, and you didn't really need like a seat bag, although I used a seat bag just to slightly better distribute the weight on my bike. That is kind of one of the dangers of having so much capacity, is that if you overstuff it, it might make your front end feel a little wobbly, might induce a little shimmy. So that's something you'll have to figure out with your particular bike. So what I used to mount this on the Sour was actually a combination of a Velo Orange out there and back front rack or front rear rack, and a Cycles Mandeville platform basket rack. And that worked really well. In fact, in some ways, I think something like that is necessary. Let's talk about some of the downsides, or not necessarily downsides, but things you have to keep in mind if you're interested in this bag. Let me remove the things, mostly jackets. Okay, so this is the bag empty. And as you can see, it doesn't have any structure to it. This is one of the downsides of this bag. If you don't have this bag to kind of like halfway capacity or with rigid things on the bottom, it tends to be a little droopy. In fact, when I was mounting this just on the rack, it would kind of spill over the sides like this. If you're going full on bike packing, clearly you can put your tent poles, your tent in here, or let's say a sleeping pad or something rigid to give it a little bit more of a base, and that helps fixes that. But by itself, there's no internal stiffeners. It's a very soft bag. That's kind of one downside for me. Like if, let's say you were going to do a grocery run and you didn't have a platform bag, it would be a little bit droopy on the way to the market until you filled it up. That's why I think the ideal support system for this is something like a basket or a protor rack. And you can see, I think this gets kind of exacerbated a little bit more when you add the brain to it. It feels like a melting snowman without stuff in it. So you can see it's just a little bit floppy when it's not stuffed to, like halfway and without rigid things at the bottom. This leads me to the other kind of downside. Depending on your bike, it might look like a stack of melting pancakes. What I mean by this is on the sour, it has a relatively slack head tube angle. What I found what was happening was, the brain was being pulled in this direction, but the base was being pulled in the other direction. Again, because of just how slack the bike was. So it always looked like a falling stack of pancakes. This was more like an aesthetic thing than it affected like handling or the functionality of the bag. So I think if you have bikes that tend to have a, kind of steeper head tube angle, let's say 70 to 72 degrees, once it gets into the 60s, and also depending on how far forward or back the handlebar is, it can get a little droopy and not stand perfectly upright. Another kind of downside is, as much as I love these toggles, they are super adjustable, very simple to replace. When we got to the hotel, I was unpacking the bag and didn't secure it very well, and it actually fell off. Thankfully, when I came back the next morning, the strap was still there, but that's something to keep in mind. I would either change this to a slightly different system or have a couple of spares in hand just in case you accidentally lose this, you forget to secure it tightly. I think the pro move would be to remove it completely and stuff it into the brain, just so there's no opportunity for this to fall off while you're walking around town. Another downside for me is that it's not super obvious how everything's like strapped together necessarily. So for example, without watching the video, I wouldn't have known that this should go over the handlebar. And then there's this 3-point strap system here, which, makes sense after you mess with it, but it just looks like a jumble of straps. So it's one of those bags that's super flexible, can accommodate, a big load, but you really have to experiment with it to get it right. A good analogy is like, it's sort of the difference between a freestanding tent, which is fairly simple. The poles click together and you just shove it into the sleeves, as opposed to something like a tarp tent. It takes a while to figure out, where to place the pegs, how to tension it so it has good shape and form. I think that's actually a really good analogy, because this forgoes kind of the structure, aka the poles, for a softer construction, which gives you a lighter bag, bigger capacity, but you have to work a little bit harder to finesse the packing and securing it to your bike so it's nice and not flopping around like a stack of melting pancakes. The big question is it any good? I think it really depends on, clearly how much capacity you need. If you need to carry lots of stuff on the bike, then this is one of the few purpose-built bags for the Ophir stuffer. If you want like a super tight system, then this might not necessarily be for you. And you also have to be okay with some kind of rack because um, as of now, at least, there's no clear way to run this without a rack. I think it would just kind of flop all over the place. Again, it doesn't have that form. I do think it brings lots of novel ideas to the market. I think the strap system is pretty cool. Very, very simple, easy to replace, and not a whole lot to break. Again, I hesitate to call it hardware. It's more like software, if you will. I do think the brain is a great idea, especially this version of it that turns into a day pack. I think this is super cool. If you guys are interested in supporting their Kickstarter, I'm going to put the link in the description below. But before you leave, don't go because we still have some party pace caps. I finally got my very own here in Spain. They're a cool, very low profile, not a tall trucker. This has kind of a nice brushed, worn in feel. It's more of a clayish color. So a mature person's brick, if you will. This is how we keep the lights on. So if you guys like the content, pick up some merch, or better yet, join us on Patreon. And as always, keep the supple side down.